உலகெங்கும் தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.
Welcome to CrossRoads on TVI. I'm Parthi Kandaval. Many of us, on a daily or rather hourly basis, use our phones, tablets, and computers to convey personal information, what we think is personal and private. However, with the recent whistleblowing by Edward Snowden of the United States government's electronic surveillance by the National Security Agency and the CIA, the bubble on our blissful ignorance has been popped. The publications by Mr. Snowden reveal that the CIA and the NSA have access to data by all the major internet companies such as Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Yahoo, etc. The question becomes, how safe are our private communications? How safe is our information with these companies? Why am I getting ads in my email that are directly connected to my private emails? To discuss this topic of government and corporate surveillance, we are joined by Satragan Sivayanasudaram, Saji Kadir Gamanathan, and Prakash Anthony Pillai. Satragan is a software developer, Saji is a government employee, and Prakash is a culture critic. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this show. And also viewers, please join us at 416-623-8100. 416-623-8100. Please join our conversation and share your thoughts and ideas about this recent topic that's been in our news. So, a lot of us use our phones and our internet to use personal and private messaging over email and Facebook. But, the recent light that's been shed on what's happening with the government and certainly the corporations have shown that, they have access to our personal information. How important is that for an average citizen?
I don't think it's for an average citizen. If you have, basically, you can't trust anything that you put on online. Same with your phone. There's a degree of privacy with your phone, but not a whole lot, depending on what apps you're running and what kind of phone you have. If you have anything you want to keep secret, then don't do it online. For an average citizen, okay, sure, you're a law-abiding citizen, you don't have any secrets, but I think you should still be concerned because this kind of information can be used to affect like governments, public officials, as well as financial industry and stuff like that.
So should the average citizen care?
I actually say that average citizen should be very much aware of what's going on. I think it's really important. There's two levels to this, right? The first is like the Facebook one where you put everything up, and now there's actually a really big fight over employers looking at your Facebook account. There's been some privacy legal struggles that in some cases are going on right now. If an employer can demand to view your Facebook account, if they know you have a Facebook account, can they demand to look at it to judge if you're a right employee?
Okay.
And this is somewhat like in some questions about teachers. Does the public school board have a right to do that?
Yeah. We'll come back to that discussion on our personal information via our employers. But the idea of national security, the argument is that government should have access to this to keep us safe, and that's the CIA line. But is that a valid argument?
I think, it all really precipitated post 9/11, right? And America really felt vulnerable. And after this, they had to do anything and everything they could. So, when you go to an airport, obviously there's a lot of, it's a lot more, you feel a lot more violated sometimes when you're going through an airport. But this is another way their other avenue to investigate people, to find out what threats are coming to the States. And I think there's a line to be drawn, right? On some hand, they're taking data, and what they're saying is it's metadata, so it's not necessarily like the actual conversation, but aspects of the conversation. So where it's taking place, how long is the conversation, who's it from, who's it to. So it's not necessarily the conversation itself, but aspects of it. And you wonder, is that important or is it?
Okay, but let's. I know that the government is couching like, we're storing the data. We're not going through it. But do you feel they have
on the political aspect? I think that definitely right, because not everybody in any society or country, we don't all share the same political ideals, cultural ideals. I mean, people have different ideas and thoughts, right? And especially on how a country should be run, and that's perfectly fine with a democracy. That's actually one of the really great elements of a democracy, because it can have multiple ideas of how society should be run, and to people to contest and argue and be able to do that. Now, when this kind of information is being controlled by the state itself, that has first of a chilling effect on discussion, like public discussion, as well as like for me to be able to openly say critical things of the Canadian state online, or even in a private discussion over email. I'm like, man, I think this immigration policy is like bunks. It's horrible, and I completely disagree with that. But does the Canadian state have a right to actually view that, to look at that? That's actually no, because then that actually shuts down the very valid forms of communication. I mean, how do we arrive at better policies if, ideas start as a minority idea, right? And they win over people, and you have to discuss it and go over it, and you need to have that freedom. But if you can, one of the most dangerous points for an idea is when it's just being formulated, right? When discussions are being had, when you're talking to your friends, when you're just venting to a friend on email.
To balance the security concerns that governments have to keep us safe, what are your thoughts on that?
They're definitely going too far. They're saying they're covering the metadata, but I think the only reason they're doing that is because it's too difficult to cover everything.
Okay.
It's just too technologically infeasible. And I think as soon as technology catches up, they'll do as much as they can. And I think you're right. It's not that effective at catching terrorists. They didn't do anything with the Boston Marathon, which should have been, the kind of case that this kind of data should have helped capture.
Okay.
But they are, assisting the DEA for drug enforcement. That's not national security.
Well, to play devil's advocate, one argument, a line of thinking, is that we can't leave this up to democracy for the public to decide how much data is appropriate. Like you said, there was a line between what they can know and what they can't know. And the argument is that you need a certain specialized group, like the CIA, to ensure everything that's going on is whether it's a threat or not.
The biggest problem is not so much the line, is the oversight. You need somebody to make sure that these guys aren't going too far, aren't using this information for their own personal gains. And what we've seen with Snowden is that the FISA courts aren't doing anything. So
they're using a broad net approach, right? It's not specifically targeted. To give you an example, the question is, what is national security? Because what's come out, and this is actually really well known in certain political circles, right? These COINTEL programs. What constitutes an internal national security threat? I mean, Occupy Wall Street, a peaceful, a non-violent movement, a political movement, demanding some serious structural changes in the United States, was being monitored through these COINTEL programs. And there's actually records of the FBI monitoring and disrupting and sending in agents into these movements. And this is a non-violent peaceful movement that's trying to call for democratic change, right? So if these movements are being monitored through these programs as well, then I mean, this is what I mean. There's this chilling idea, these open discussions. Sometimes we need to be able to have open discussions to really come to new political ideas.
Well, let's see a clip about the White House, about the man who brought all of this to front, Edward Snowden. So let's see what the White House has to say about Edward Snowden.
Are obviously in conversations, and that we are working with them or discussing with them, or rather expecting them to look at the options available to them to expel Mr. Snowden back to the United States to face justice for the crimes with which he is charged. I would note that given our intensified cooperation with Russia after the Boston Marathon bombings and our history of working with Russia on law enforcement matters, including returning numerous high-level criminals back to Russia at the request of the Russian government, that we do expect the Russian government to look at all the options available to them to expel.
Many in U.S. Congress and the United States view Edward Snowden as a traitor for spilling national security secrets. And in that light of American security post 9/11 and the threat of terrorist attacks, is he a traitor?
Definitely not. And even though some politicians are saying that he is, the request that they've made to Russia basically doesn't say that he's a traitor. They're not trying to extradite him for treason or anything like that. I don't remember the specific reason why they're trying to extradite him, but it was like this obscure law from like the 40s, I think.
Okay.
But
Some Espionage Act, right? Like it's like
on the other hand, like, you know, he did do something that he was contracted against, right? And he did it complicitly. And on one hand, you would think you would be faithful enough to your values to come against the consequences and and face them.
Right.
He did do a public service to an extent to make these things visible to the greater public, but he's also got to face the consequences. Which, I mean, on one hand,
I would disagree with you there, because there are also whistleblower laws, right? Like that if you're at work and your work is doing something illegal or negative or or unethical, there are whistleblower laws. I mean, and technically Obama was supposed to sign into several of these but they've actually completely ignored them, and they're using these to attack.
But the whistleblower laws are in a framework of staying within the country and facing and then being covered by that.
Yeah,
right?
but whistleblowers are being attacked really harshly by this administration, from Bradley Manning to now to Snowden. They're being completely ignored. They have no power. So these people have no protection. So honestly, it's actually a really important remark on the state of American democracy. Something that a lot of times gets really glamorized. But this is actually a really huge step backwards. That people that have to call out the American democracy for doing things that
on the other hand,
under their legal rights, they have to flee the country. It's the only option, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why a lot of other countries have actually stepped up to offer Snowden
protection, like in Russia, right? But on the other hand, the argument is, if you're not doing anything wrong, why should you be wary of the government having control of your information, or at least observing to see if you're doing anything that's against American citizens?
The thing about ideas is, you may not be doing anything wrong, but if you share an idea that might be
extreme or
then you don't want to be under surveillance for something like that. You'll end up the problem is that because of the amount of privacy that's being invaded, that it's very easy for them to go that one step over and start monitoring the kind of ideas that people say
and the fact is, you could be doing nothing wrong, but that information that they collect on yourself, you don't necessarily have the authority or the wherewithal to understand what's being collected about you. And even if you're not doing anything wrong,
there's absolutely no oversight.
Yeah, there's no oversight, or some other aspects of that information could be collected for other nefarious for nefarious purposes.
Given I want to look at a Canada-U.S. angle. Given all of us generally use American companies for our our internet purposes, whether it's email, Facebook, social networking. What role does the Canadian government have in allowing this to happen or not?
I think there's actually pretty strong roles. I've heard about I'm not sure. I think the privacy commissioners of Ontario getting involved when taking an active stand of what the privacy features are available on Facebook, and I think there is
But given that all our information are in servers, in whether it's Sao Paulo for Gmail or in Facebook, can the Canadian government control if these American companies have access to our data?
Well, I think no, I don't think they do. But what they could do is actually be a little. We have been hearing stuff from the privacy commissioner about stuff like this, but we need our elected officials to say something positive about privacy as well. And what we could do is encourage businesses to come here. There are 2 secure email services in the U.S. that got shut down in the last few weeks. In relation to national security, they can't disclose. One company, Lavabit, couldn't disclose why they were shutting down. They basically said either they violate the privacy of the American citizen or they shut down. So they shut down. And another company, Secure Circle, I think, basically said, we get what's going on, we're shutting down. So if our government starts saying something positive about privacy, passing bills that protect Canadian privacy, then hopefully we'll see companies come here. It should help our tech sector, but it'll also help our
But
privacy.
given like the close relationship between American and Canadian intelligence circles, is that even a possibility?
See,
Like,
and that- and
we
that-
share intelligence and information
And that's the
daily.
political question, right? It's not a technological question because it's just a matter of having the servers. And and a lot of these like the owner of LavaBit has said, if you want security, you cannot depend on any company that has physical connection to like the American mainland. You can't like if they have their servers in the U.S. or not. And it's absolutely a political question, right? This isn't a technological question. This question of privacy, I mean, and as you said, exactly, you need to have our politicians step up. Unfortunately, like the Canadian politicians are hand in hand with the American politicians on this, right? With their there has to be like a really strong push from like a Canadian public like political push to keep our like elected officials responsible towards our privacy. I mean, the Ontario the Privacy Commission has called out Google on some of its things and forced them to undo certain things. Right now, there is a court case going on right now about privacy of Gmail.
Yeah, and Gmail is, I mean, Google very recently acknowledged that it's not unreasonable for us to have access to your email. That it's, what's the exact thing? Is that it's, Gmail users have no reasonable expectation that their emails are confidential, right? So given that, and we don't see a mass exodus of people leaving.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Like this is just breaking news, right?
In a way, but I mean, the reality is I think most people operate under assumption that, these companies probably do have access, but do we really care, right?
And I think
so given like the apathy Canadians and Americans have towards this access to our information,
I would disagree. There's no like in circles that are very well informed on these issues. There's like actually a really clear consensus that like this is like a really bad state of affairs. I mean, people are like there's already discussions of how to maintain your privacy. There are organizations like the Electronic Freedom Foundation that are like there's the construction of programs such as Tor, Tails that can prevent like snooping on you, and there's other technological stuff there. It's a matter of like political will, right? Like we have a postal service where like our mail is nobody can open it. It's it's illegal to open. So we can have a similar service in Canada for email.
So for email, we already discussed companies getting shut down. You were talking about the apathy that it seems like citizens have. There is a search provider called DuckDuckGo that provides secure search services. And their numbers have been going up substantially since this case came to light.
And they specifically don't take information of what your search requests or use it to provide information to other people. And
they're a good service for this. They're still US based, or there's a degree of suspicion. But the point is, they've gotten a lot more interest, a lot more subscribers, a lot more.
And it's
people.
a very political example.
Certainly, it has increased, right? But if there's a ground-swelling support for more anti-privacy, anti-laws or regulations, wouldn't we see that in the demand to our politicians? And we don't see that being on the federal news.
So in the Europe, they're much more advanced on this, right? In the political movement side of this, Pirate Bay. So Pirate Bay, it's a website that you can download movies, music, whatever, freely. It's a file sharing, basically, through BitTorrents. So they actually have like a political party site. They've been attacked, but they managed to actually persevere, get people like elected into like and to protect like these like laws about like file sharing, information freedom. Above and beyond that, though, they just recently created a browser so that if you're in the United States, you can go to them without any problems. And it was like there's about 10,000. I don't know how many zeros, but there's 10,000 to 100,000 downloads within the first week. That's how much there's demand for these things, right? I mean, for a lot of people just don't realize the context of it. That's the question. Like that's why these discussions have to be had. What is the effect of PRISM?
It's time for a short break. Dear viewers, please join us in this conversation as we return from the break. Share us your stories, your thoughts on corporate and government surveillance of our personal and private data. Please join us after this break. Welcome back, dear TVI viewers. Today we're discussing the level of access government surveillance and corporations have to our personal information through our email, Facebook, and private messages. Is this good, bad, or just an inevitable reality of our modern times? Please join our conversation at 416-623-8100. So before the break, we're discussing the level of access governments have to our personal information. With that, it obviously comes through corporations who create these products that we use, whether it's Gmail or Facebook. Lately, a lot of us have observed that we see messages, advertisements on Facebook or Gmail connected to our personal messages. Is that something that these corporations have the right to?
So you're not paying for Facebook.
Yeah.
You're not paying for Gmail, and you're getting something for free essentially. And I think if it's free, there's a certain level of monetization that needs to happen. Now I imagine Facebook's still trying to figure out the best way to achieve revenue from their service that they're providing for you. So similarly, I think Gmail, by looking through your emails and targeting ads, not the worst thing in the world. Hopefully they're not using it. They're not using it to like really get for some particular person to try and understand you particularly, but rather to.
But do you think morally they have the right to monetize that?
I mean, this is like public information, right? Like, I mean, there's a difference between privacy and public. What you decide to put on public, I think that's
no,
fine.
let's take our email conversation.
The email, right? I mean, I've been thinking about this. I mean, the technology is really new. Facebook, it's all like this new social media aspect of it. Who can control it? I mean, there's always been a really strong backlash whenever like Facebook changes privacy laws to try to be able to monetize more clearly the stuff. And they're like, I mean, the first controversial thing was like, do you know you have no ownership of the photos you put up on Facebook? And like there's a backlash. There's pages on Facebook against this, right? Like people are against it. The question is, right, there aren't alternatives. Like what are the alternatives? Like there isn't like a government run.
But Facebook. Do you think they have the moral right to?
Morally, yeah, like, but we need to know, yeah, you're right. Like we need to be aware of what we're giving them. And in relation to that, I think people should be aware that if you go to a website that has a like button, it doesn't matter if you click that like button, Facebook knows you went to that website if you leave yourself logged in. And I think this is sort of the thing that, okay, sure, you're giving information to Facebook, you're giving information to Facebook, but in these cases, you don't know that you are, and you should be. And so Facebook should be disclosing
that they track your internet browsing
outside of Facebook.
Outside of Facebook.
From those like buttons, any site that has those like buttons. So that should be disclosed. And
then what about Gmail, right? I mean, it's a similar comparison with the governments, right? The Gmail is going through your emails and creating ads based on the content.
I mean, I think this is like a modern question that needs to be hashed out about our infrastructure, right? This is the problem you get when you have companies, like private companies, creating what are now almost like really publicly, like these are like almost services, kind of like postal service was historically. That is almost like it's you have a right to these services. You need these services to be able to function in a modern society. You need an email account. The same with like a phone line, which are kind of like basic services.
Right.
So I mean, in a lot of sense, and we talked about this a little bit. Our governments need to kind of step up and like step in. If these are services we need, and they shouldn't be run for profit. Then, like one of the fundamental issues here is. As you touched on it, Facebook and Google, they need to make money. But like some of these services are essential services, and that's what I'm looking for, right? So if they're really essential services, some of these services need to be run by either publicly
I
owned.
think you're getting into a nationalization program.
A little bit, right? This question is right.
Can we trust the government to run an email provider?
And the thing too is like. Government may not be the most innovative in providing these services. Facebook, Google constantly innovates and tries to make their services better integrated and useful to you.
Just to flip that question a little bit, right? Like maybe not the state running these services, but there are publicly run non-profit. Like if you use Firefox, you're basically using the non-profit version of of any browser because like the privately driven. As efficient as Microsoft was nowhere near as good as like Firefox is for security, personalization.
Sajid, is email an essential right?
It's getting to that point, I think, Facebook, there's a better way. There's a product called Diaspora,
Yeah.
which is it's open source, community developed,
Okay.
and also it's decentralized. And I think the big issue with a lot of this stuff is that we are putting everything into one place. Google went down for 2 minutes on Friday. The amount of internet traffic dropped by 40%. That was one company. So that they're getting too big, and I think we need to find peer-to-peer options, decentralized options where we're not putting all of our data in one place. Diaspora is still in its infancy. It's sort of relying on you to run your own server, because that way it's not in one, in a centralized location where any, a single government letter gets access to it.
So you work with both private and government. How important is data and the tracking of data for our government services?
Honestly, I'm not entirely that's not entirely.
I can touch on a little bit on that aspect, right? I mean, like, there's really strict privacy laws about what information the government can access, right? For one of the reasons, if you ever go to like the LCBO and you're like, oh, you need ID, and you try to give your health card, nobody can accept your health card because that is private information. So they're not supposed to even look at it to look at your age. It's actually really highly controlled. Then that's the kind of control we need. That's the kind of political will. That's the level people have already demanded of their basic medical information. So if there's other information that the public wants that kind of security for, it is going to be a political issue. We need to push it forward, right? It's not like essential services should be run by not for profit. They shouldn't be the profit. The very basis of the profit motive in essential service is really problematic, and we're running into that border right now, right? Like that boundary of it.
Sajid, your thoughts on governments running what Prakash is saying is essential services?
Like, I mean, yeah, it is a really interesting idea because the postal service is, it's invaluable. It's pretty well done. You pay 49 cents or 50 cents and you get a letter in a few days to British Columbia. But at the same time, I still think there's something, and whenever you get an internet account, like with Rogers or like Bell, they usually give you an email account with it. When you go to university, they give you an email account with it. So I think to an extent, yeah, there is a certain level of like essential services, but I'm still of the notion that there's only so much innovation that could happen when it's done by a private organization. Like, I mean, this Firefox example, for sure, they innovated and they made Internet Explorer and Microsoft try to keep up. But to try and nationalize some of these new technological innovations, I think government may not be the perfect means to do that.
What are some ways to prevent users of Facebook and Gmail to as much as you can prevent the amount of access they have to your content?
Like, I think the fact is, as much as we bash Facebook for being so loose with its privacy, it does have an immense amount of strict privacy settings. It's just buried somewhere where most people don't necessarily find it. So I think maybe making that a little bit open and more transparent, providing that information a little more readily for people that want to see it.
And those privacy settings actually came from direct demand from the people, right? Like, a lot of those users are like, we want privacy settings, right? I mean, and this question it's still being hashed out. It's all very new technology. We've all kind of gotten so used to it because it's so essential, but it's actually being hashed out. These things are being developed as we go, right? Diaspora, I think, is really good. It hasn't picked up yet. Like, they're developing it, and it needs to get to a certain level of capacity before it becomes a really good service. But the basic idea is inspiring enough that advanced people on the internet are trying to work it out. Like, not for profit, they're just doing it. Like, they're trying to create it.
For Gmail, there are encryption techniques that you can do on top, where you just basically encrypt your emails before you send them out. But the party reading whoever you're sending it to also needs to be able to decrypt that information. So usually you need to share data outside of Gmail, at least your encryption keys, and then you can.
Do you think it's becoming increasing that companies are relying on data from our Gmail and Facebooks to cater marketing towards us? Like, do we see this happening?
Well, I suppose it would be more, Google and Facebook providing that avenue for companies too, because nevertheless, it's still that hub that Google and Facebook own that companies try to try to infiltrate to try and get to us. Sorry, infiltrate is probably the worst word.
Yeah.
I actually think that's actually the perfect word. I would actually
like, I mean, you know, they work with Facebook and Google to try and get to us through these services. And I think to an extent, you know, I'm going back to that same point. Facebook and Google need money. We're the captive audience, and in essence, we as users are the product. We're the product that those
But
advertisers
a lot
are
of that
paying for.
information they market to other corporations like the banks and stuff, or like whoever would like to reach any target market.
So I mean, I want to point this out, right? Like
Yeah.
Facebook, without the people using it, would be completely debunked, right? Like it would be.
Of
like
course, but the reality is 500 million people log in every day.
Yeah, but and that's and it's a lot of the energy of the people logging in that keeps Facebook relevant. You know, MySpace. As soon as people started to like find something better than MySpace.
Yeah, but let's
Like,
speak in contemporary times, right? Right now they're
That was
taking.
like 2 years ago, but yeah. go on.
Yeah, no, it's granted MySpace, you know, flopped, right? But Facebook, for all purpose considered, is looking to stay on as the primary social network for most of the world. But my question regarding other corporations, like Facebook takes our data and allows them for a price to access our accounts and our profiles. Is that we all agree that, you know, Facebook, Gmail have the rights to, you know, market to us and monetize it, but taking it and marketing or selling it to other corporations?
I think I'm curious to know the extent to which they do that. If it's another company that creates like a sponsored page and tries to spend sponsored advertisements, that's one thing. But if they're, and you know, I imagine it's, you know, an advertiser goes onto Facebook, develops a profile of their target audience, and then sends it to them. That's fine. But if they're like, and this would be very troubling if they're, you know, on a mass trying to like get all the data that everyone's posting and liking and tries to like categorize
say you're
it.
messaging somebody, oh, you're looking to buy a house, but they're taking that and selling it to a mortgage broker or a bank who might want to target you specifically.
I think, and then that bank reaching out to you personally would be very troubling.
I mean, I think there's a theoretical question here, like what is like the space, like a privacy space, right? Of like what you have the right to control, and what like other agents in society have a right to. And marketing is really problematic right now. They're saying, like, psychologically speaking, I mean, you don't let, you know, it used to be on the, you know, YTV and stuff. Children's advertiser, like toy companies would advertise specifically to get children to buy their toys, and to like, and it was proving to be very detrimental. There's a whole legal case around this, and they had to prevent it. This question of marketing, how do you let it, like, you know, affect our societies? And I think it's actually an important question for Tamils. 1-2 generations ago, we came from a culture that didn't have a lot of marketing in it. It was pretty straightforward. A lot of the culture was controlled, like, you know, through social organizations people were in their local areas. Now a lot of our social inputs are coming from these like a profit motive again, like these corporations are using marketing as a way of creating and affecting culture to make a profit, not for the benefit of the people, but for a profit. You have to always be like, you have to understand that element. And it's actually like organizations such as Adbusters are kind of talking about the detrimental effect, like, you know, psychological, emotional, a lot of problems arising that didn't exist in, like, you know, 2-3 generations ago.
Yeah, no question. And Satchkin, what are your thoughts on the third-party corporations using those details to target their marketing towards you?
Well,
is that fair game?
I don't know if it's fair to say it's fair game. Like, marketing is a tricky question because like. It should be fair game, but that's not taking into consideration human psychology, and when you consider how easy it is to manipulate people, you should, you know, take a step back with that, you know, when sharing that kind of data. There was an interesting case, was it a few years ago? I think there was an article in the New York Times about Target where this man kept on getting flyers from Target saying, you know, about pregnancy stuff, and he's like, why the hell am I getting all this stuff? Turns out his daughter was pregnant, and Target had collected all this data about this family and knew that his daughter was pregnant and sent them targeted advertising to that effect.
But in the other hand, like, to, you know, play devil's advocate on Target's behalf, that family did get a 5% discount for using that loyalty card, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, this is kind of the thing.
And there's an element of convenience.
Yeah,
right?
and this is the kind of thing that, you know, companies, that, you know, they could lower their prices, but they want to really know what drives people in and want to know their customers. They could call you up every so often, but that could be really inconvenient. They could like stand outside the exit way of, you know, the entrance and exit of Target and ask you, what did you buy today?
Yeah.
Or they could give you a card for 5% off, and people use that.
This is a thing that every individual has to decide for themselves. My brother uses a credit card all the time. He likes the discounts. I pay cash whenever I can, and I don't care about the 5%. But that's me.
Yeah.
And
That's fair enough, yeah.
Every individual has to, and same with Facebook. Be aware that whatever you post on Facebook is going to everyone, even despite what you think your privacy settings are.
Okay.
And yeah, just make your own choice.
And
Okay, it's time for a short break. Dear viewers, please join us after these brief announcements. Welcome back, dear viewers. Today on CrossRoads, we're discussing the consequences of government and corporations having access to our private and personal data. So, you know, just before the break, we're talking about how third-party corporations will have access to our data through Facebook, Gmail. You know, as increasingly as the net is becoming personalized, is that a good thing or a bad thing, as opposed to, like, say 10 years ago when everything was brand new on the internet? Is this degree of personalization, whether it's through Facebook, Google, Yahoo, whatever it is that a good thing for the experience an individual has on the internet?
So I think it really depends on you know, your mentality with privacy, right? I mean, if you're willing to, like, you know, let loose on a little bit of privacy, you can get a lot of useful information from, you know, wake up in the morning and you know what the traffic's going to be like on your drive to work, or you know, what the weather's like, because it knows where you live. So to an extent, yeah, I think it could be useful. You know, personally, there's an extent that I do like my you know, my convenience, and I let companies know things about me. But to another extent, yeah, I want to keep that side of my life private.
I think you, more than anything now, you have to be aware of what information you're giving out. 10 years ago, there were a lot of different small companies. Mostly data was decentralized. People ran their own servers. Now it's in the cloud. Everyone, you know, puts all their data in one basket, and you just need to be aware of what you're putting in that basket. So. Sure, it seems ridiculously convenient these days compared to what it was 10 years ago. But we are giving up a lot of our privacy.
A lot of control too, right? I mean, there's examples of, like, when the PlayStation network was hacked, a lot of, like, credit card information was lost because that, like, the central servers were hacked. I mean, I want to take a more radical position. I mean, I think it's really invasive, and I think the question is, like, this idea of the, you know, marketing for profit, and it isn't even that successful, but it's also really like sales and marketing. I have a bit of background in that sense, that a lot of sales and marketing is about managing the person to buy your product. Like, it's a bit of a trickery involved. You're tricking people into it. So when what seems convenient is actually them tricking you into.
But is it tricking or elementary human psychology? Like, you know,
well, it's elementary psychology, but you're using that psychology to trick a lot of people. Like, you're taking agency away from people, right? Instead of when people, like, you know, when you have a sale, you're not going to buy something because you need it.
But don't we have the agency to not?
Cheap.
But don't we have the agency to not buy it? Like, say if they market
with
a certain mortgage or a certain, you know, sports team, we have the agency to choose not to buy.
But some people are actually more susceptible for that trickery. It's actually quite interesting of how easily it is to like to trick people into buy stuff. It's actually really surprising. I mean, you switch a couple of words around in a sentence, and from not buying it to they will buy it.
But doesn't that create the onus on us as individuals to have the willpower to refuse to buy something? Like, ultimately we have the right to go and purchase something or not, correct?
I mean, and theoretically, but when you have, like, imagine a day where you sit on a day without any marketing. It's actually like we're bombarded by marketing in every angle. And the question is how, like, you know, where do you get to stop being marketed at?
But at the same time, if you're getting bombarded every time, eventually you get desensitized to it. And I find at that point, they've like saturated me, and I'm not going to buy anything.
I think we are getting, as a society, getting better at filtering out marketing. I think the technology has been helping a little bit in that area, where we have our phones with us when we go shopping, and we can look up the quality of the product right there. And I think people are paying more attention to other people's reviews. It has become easier for individuals to say that they don't like a product on Facebook or on a
there's a bit more feedback, but I think the theory is still up in the air. Like we've gotten better at filtering out like marketing, but the really good marketing is the one that gets past the filtering. Like it's very like subconscious level, and we're in just like bombarded by it. And there's actually like really bad psychological effects on kids, right? Like these questions of hyperactivity, these mental capacity. I mean sometimes the question of like you see between even in our community, the generation that grew up in the village with no TV and just one radio is very different from the modern like generation, right? I mean, there's a certain vapidity among like the newer generations. I'm including myself in here too.
And
right?
there's actually, within education circles, there's a talk of reducing our exposure our children have to the internet. And do you think that is a growing phenomenon within families and even individuals of reducing our exposure and our connectivity to the internet?
I think that's definitely a good idea. I mean, I'm just thinking to my personal example of how I like reading, short blog posts and things that aren't very long. Reading an entire novel is something that's a little more, you have to spend a little more time and be a little more dedicated. And for children, I can imagine if they're just used to seeing like 5-second clip here and 10-second thing there, as a result they might not be able to like read and concentrate for like a very long time.
I mean there's laws against like specifically to make sure children aren't advertised to on like YTV. I mean the existence of YTV, a nationalized kind of TV service for youth without like too much advertisement or commercials is specifically because of that, right? Like it's deleterious, excuse my breakdown of language skills, but I mean it goes further than that, right? Like wealthy people who can afford to, and in the know, and like white Canadians, as we like, they go to cottages and they unplug from society.
I'm pretty sure a lot of different Canadians go to cottages.
But like I mean, that's the example, right? You go to like they go to Muskoka to just unplug and to get away from it all for a reason, like to recover from the modern pace of society.
And going on your previous point, I do feel like most young families don't unplug their kids. Like it feels like, I guess our generation have sort of felt like a wonderment with technology and the pace of technology, and we've been more willing to share that with our kids. So I don't really know if it's a good idea or not, but I feel like people aren't doing that, aren't unplugging.
Sajid, what do you feel about like the amount of exposure young children are having now, growing up in a totally connected environment?
So at the same time, it's I'm curious to know how many of them still like reading, or like as in novels, not like a funny page on the internet. It'd be really interesting to know what they're like. But at the same time, they may be a little more industrious or innovative. They might be able to find things quicker and pick things up quickly, right? They may not need to read that big textbook because they found a quick summary on the internet with a video tutorial, right? There are negatives to this like more technologically advanced age, but there are a lot of disadvantages, but there are advantages that may not be as readily apparent.
And I think the attention thing is an interesting one, because we've gotten accustomed to YouTube and Facebook. The generation coming up like Vine, which is 5-second clips, and Twitter, which is a single short sentence. So it seems like
our attention spans are increasingly shortening.
It seems like that's the trend, at least with the technology. So,
but do you think there'll be a counter trend where society, like, feels that it's too much and then pushes away from all this technology?
I unfortunately think maybe not. I think that's this is the way we're going. Back in the day, you needed to know that textbook worth of knowledge, because to go back to that textbook and figure out that knowledge may be very annoying. Nowadays, you could just do that quick Google search, and you can know what year and day
And
D-Day
as a result,
was,
do you
right?
feel there's an effect on how we perceive education?
Perceive education and the knowledge that we need in this future society, yeah. Like, I mean, you may not need to be as, you may not need to know facts and figures, but may need to be more resourceful and innovative in how you approach things.
You know, and I would disagree. I would say there's actually more negatives than positives at this point. I think we've crossed that threshold of where, like, you know, a lot of the positive benefits have stopped accruing, and we're going into like knowledge is becoming superficial now. Like, people don't understand the basic natures of society. You know, like the more, like, you know, you have a superficial knowledge. Hey, if I do this, I can get this. Da da da. You don't. If you don't ask the whys or wheres or whats, those are really important questions of humanity, right? Like, to really function, to be really. I mean, like, you know, the old terms for, like, you know, wisdom and like intelligence come from those asking those questions. If you just move away to like the Twitter discussions, the ability for children to even have, like, sit around and have a discussion among themselves is an important, you know, it's, you know, having a conversation somewhere over a coffee. That's an important tactic. People don't have that anymore. I think, like, we're like, and like, you know, the whole Occupy movement, where it was actually, instead of like a Facebook movement, it was a physical movement where people got together and actually spoke about, like, you know, the problems of society.
And actually, on that question, is the level of social connectivity of Facebook affecting our in-person relationships?
Definitely.
Because they're not real. The people are creating personas for themselves on Facebook. We know that human beings can't really handle more than 150 relationships. Facebook, a lot of people have 1,000. So who are those other people? So it's Facebook is not real. It's not a real friendship.
But on the other hand, like, I think there's something to be said where you could, you know, you have old classmates from like 20 years ago, or like people you just randomly encountered, and you want to keep in touch, and this is a very non-active way. Back in the day, you might have to, like, keep up with them, call them every so often, check to see if the numbers change or if they've moved. But with Facebook, you could kind of, there's that central spot, and you could always go back to that, and you know that the chances are they may not, provided they don't, you know, delete their account. There's always that passive way to keep in touch, and I think there's like something to be said about that.
There's definitely good qualities to Facebook, but it's not a substitute for a real friendship.
You know, you usually hear oftentimes people spending hours on Facebook, and that opportunity cost of those hours could be spent in-person social building, right?
Exactly.
Do you feel like the benefits of you know, being connected to old friends and you know, the wider network outweighs or is less than the harmful effects of affecting your in-person social life?
I think so, because again, when we're talking about rekindling old friendships, you're just curious about, you know, somebody you knew from high school. So it's not worth that much versus getting to know someone and talking to someone for an hour.
I mean, we're lucky in the Tamil community that we still have, like, a lot of the old traditions of like community and friendship. You know, you used to have ur sangams and, like, you know, like undu kudals and all that. Like, you actually meet people face to face, get together, huge groups. You start exploring into some of, like, the more West, like, you know, like the Western cultural, like, you know, communities that are specifically very Western. Like, you know, I hate using the term, like, white Canadians, right? Like they're very disjointed. Trying to get them together to do, like, a collective action. You know, like, one of the things that's always impressed everybody, but how did you guys get 30,000 people on, like, in the street and do all this, like, collective actions, like political action? It's because we still have, like, networks of communities and people that know each other that even extend all the way back to, like, the homeland, where, like, you know, when stuff was happening in 2009, with all the connectivity information, the Canadian government could not get itself together to find out what was going on, that 40,000 people died. Well, people, like, we knew, like, the community knew, there's no question. We didn't need CNN to broadcast, we didn't need to see it on Facebook. We knew, like, it was going, like, down. And on a point on that, because I was sharing that kind of information on Facebook, my account on Facebook was shut down because I didn't, like, fit within their profile of what was a national security threat.
And it comes back and come back to a full
like, you know, just to touch
And
that
on that note,
really point out,
it's time to wrap up. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today, dear viewers. This is all the time we have, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for tuning in.
தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.